There is a quote I keep coming back to. It is not from a self help book, it is not from a motivational poster. It comes from a woman who, when a white general threatened to replace her with a white officer because he did not believe that a black woman should hold the rank she had earned, looked him dead in the eye and said there was no one qualified to replace her. She did not yell. She did not beg. And she did not shrink. She just told the truth, held her ground, and the general walked away. That woman was Lieutenant Colonel Charity Adams. And today we're going to talk about her life, her legacy, and what she can teach every single one of us, veterans, first responders, their families, anyone who has ever been told in one way or another that they did not belong in the room they were already standing in. Welcome to the Superhuman Resilience Project. I am your host, Kara. This is Season 1, Episode 8, and we are continuing our celebration of International Women's Month with a story that I genuinely believe everyone in this community needs to hear. Whether you serve, whether you protect and respond, whether you love someone who does, this episode is for you. I'm solo today. No guest, just me with the story of Charity Adams and 5 resilience lessons that I believe are as relevant to your life right now as they were to hers. I have been looking forward to this episode for weeks, and I hope by the end of it you'll understand why. Let's get into it. Before we can talk about resilience, we have to talk about context. Because resilience does not exist in a vacuum. It always exists against something. And what Charity Adams existed against was formidable on every single front. Charity Edna Adams was born December 5th, 1917 in Cottrell, North Carolina. She grew up in Columbia, South Carolina, the daughter of a Methodist minister and a school teacher. And from the very beginning of her life, she was shaped by people who believed in the power of education, of faith, and of doing the work in front of you with excellence. Not because someone was watching, but because excellence was the standard they lived by. She graduated as valedictorian of her high school class. She went on to earn a degree. She majored in both mathematics and physics. I want you to pause on that for just a second. Math and physics in the 1930s. As a black woman in the United States of America, not because the world around her was inviting her in, because it absolutely was not, but because that is what she wanted to study, and she was going to study it. She was working as a school teacher when World War II began, and it changed everything. And when the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, which later became the Women's Army Corps, was established and began recruiting black women for the first time, Charity Adams was among the very first to answer that call. She became the first black woman to be commissioned as an officer in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps. Now, I want to let that land before we move on. She was not the first woman, not the first in her city or in her region, the first black woman ever commissioned as an officer in that branch of the United States military. And she did not stop there. She rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel, making her the highest ranking black woman in the United States Army during World War II. She commanded the 6,888th Central Postal Directory Battalion, known as the 6888, which was the only all-black, all-female battalion to serve overseas during the entire war. They were deployed to Birmingham, England, and later to France, with a mission to sort through an enormous backlog of undeliverable mail. I'm talking 6 aircraft hangars full of bags of undelivered mail. Millions of pieces of mail, letters between soldiers and their families that had been piling up for months, sometimes longer. Now, I know some people might be thinking postal work, mail sorting. That does not sound like the stuff of military legend. And I want to push back on that directly because I think dismissing the mission misses the entire point. Those letters were not just paper. They were the thing keeping human beings connected across an ocean during the most catastrophic conflict the world had ever seen. A soldier in the field who has not heard from his mother in months, who does not know if his family is okay, who has nothing tethering him to the life he is fighting to get back to. That soldier's morale, his mental state, his will to keep going, all of that was tied up in whether that mail got through. Charity Adams understood that. Her battalion's motto was no mail, no morale, and they meant it. They were working in facilities that were poorly heated, dealing with infestations, running 3 rotating shifts around the clock. And they cleared that backlog, a backlog that military projections had estimated would take at least 6 months. The 6888 did it in 3 months. 3 months. Charity Adams led every bit of it. And she did it as a black woman commanding an all-black female battalion in the middle of a segregated military structure that had not exactly rolled out the welcome mat for any of them. I want you to hold all of that in your mind as we move through the resilience lessons today. Because every single one of them is grounded in the reality of what this woman actually lived. This is not abstract. This is not theoretical. This is what resilience looked like with dirt under its fingernails. The first lesson in resilience we are pulling from Charity Adams's life is this. Know your value before anyone assigns it to you. Let me go back to that story from the open because I want to give you a fuller picture. During the 6888's time in Birmingham, a white general came to Charity Adams and told her that he was considering replacing her with a white officer. And the implication was clear. He did not believe she was fit to command. He believed the presence of a white officer would bring more credibility, more authority, more legitimacy to the battalion. And Charity Adams, who at this point was leading nearly 900 women through an extraordinary mission in difficult conditions, looked at this general and told him plainly that there was no one available who was qualified to replace her. And she was right, and he left. Now, I want you to really think about what it took for her to say that. Not the words themselves. The words are almost simple. What it took was a foundation, a deep, settled, unshakable knowledge of her own worth that was not up for negotiation. She was not performing confidence. She was not bluffing. She knew who she was and what she brought, and that knowledge did not require his agreement to be true. That kind of self-knowledge is one of the hardest things to build. And I think it is particularly hard in the military and first responder culture. And here's why I say that. Your entire professional identity in these fields is wrapped up in external structures. Your rank, your unit, your role, your evaluations, your clearances, the commendations on your wall, the respect of your crew, all of that external architecture does an enormous amount of work telling you who you are and what you are worth. And while those things are not bad, the structure serves a purpose. Community and rank and mission clarity are genuinely valuable. But there's a problem. When the structure changes, when you transition out, when you get injured, or when you retire, when leadership shifts and suddenly the environment does not feel safe anymore, when you lose a partner or a teammate or the crew that you built yourself around is gone, if you have been renting your sense of value from those external structures, you do not own it, and it can be taken. Charity Adams owned hers. Nobody gave it to her. The Army did not create her self-worth. Her self-worth was there before she put on the uniform. And it was there when she took it off. So here's the question I want to sit with you for a moment. If you stripped away the rank, the badge, the role, the title, what do you know to be true about who you are? What do you bring to this world that exists independent of the job? If that question makes you uncomfortable, I'm not surprised, because it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Because for many of us in this community, we have never had to answer it. The job answered it for us. And that works great until it doesn't. It is one of the things that I am most passionate about in this work, helping people in our community build that internal foundation before a crisis forces the question. Because it is a much harder question to answer in the middle of a transition or a loss or an identity collapse than it is to explore now, proactively, from a place of stability. And if that question stirred something in you today, I want to hear about it. Email me at questionsforkara@gmail.com. That is the kind of thing I want us to unpack together. You do not have to figure it out alone. The second lesson I want to frame carefully because I think it can be misunderstood. The lesson is this: excellence is a form of protest. I need to say something plainly before I go any further. The fact that Charity Adams and the women of the 6888 had to be extraordinary just to be treated with basic dignity was not fair. It was not right. It was not the way it should have been. They were asked to exceed every standard while being offered fewer resources, less respect, and less recognition than their white male counterparts. That was an injustice. I am not going to dress it up or soften it in any way. And within that just reality, Charity Adams made a choice. She chose excellence. Not because she needed to prove herself to people who had already decided not to value her, not to win approval from a system who was stacked against her, but as a declaration, as an act of refusal to let the smallness of her circumstances make her small. She told her battalion, in effect, that she would not let anyone else's low expectations become their ceiling. 3 shifts around the clock until every piece of mail was sorted. Every soldier's mother got her letter. Every wife heard from her husband. Not because the conditions were easy, they were not. Not because the Army made it straightforward, they did not. But because the standard they set for themselves was not negotiable. And it was set by them and not by anyone else. I think about how many people in this community know this experience from the inside. Working in a department that is underfunded, on a team where leadership is dropping the ball, in a unit where resources do not match the mission. And you showed up anyway. You did the job the right way anyway. You held your standard even when the institution around you did not hold its own. That is the Charity Adams choice. That is saying my standards are not determined by your failures. Now, I also want to speak to the shadow side of this, because I believe in being honest with you about the full picture. Excellence as a form of protest is healthy when it comes from a place of internal integrity. It becomes dangerous when it slides into proving something. When it becomes about performing for people who will never acknowledge you, when it turns into the kind of grinding over work that eats you alive because you are running on fuel of other people's doubt. There is a version of this that our community falls into all the time. The culture of always giving more, always being tougher, always raising the bar for yourself. Sometimes that is genuine strength. And sometimes that is a wound driving the bus. Sometimes the inability to stop, to rest, to accept that good enough is actually good enough. That is not excellence. That is something else wearing excellence's clothing. So the question is not just, are you choosing excellence? The question is, who is your excellence for? Charity Adams was not performing for the general who tried to remove her. She was showing up for the women in her battalion. She was showing up for the soldiers waiting on their mail. She was showing up because it was the right thing to do and because it was an expression of her deepest character. That is the excellence worth choosing. The kind rooted in purpose and care, not in fear or the need for validation. Where is your excellence pointed right now? That is a question worth sitting with. Lesson 3, and this one is for every leader in our community. I want to say that broadly because I know some of you hear the word leader and immediately think it does not apply to you. Maybe you are not in a formal leadership role. Maybe you are a junior on your team. Maybe you are not active right now at all. I want to push back on that before we go any further. If you are a parent, you are a leader. If you have a partner who depends on you, you are a leader. If you have been in this work long enough that someone else newer is watching how you carry yourself, you are a leader. Leadership is not about a title, it is about influence. And if you're alive and connected to other human beings, you are influencing someone. So this lesson is for all of you. Here it is. Resilience in leadership means protecting your people even when the system will not. One of the things that stands out most to me about Charity Adams, who study her closely, is that her resilience was never just personal. She was not just tough for herself. She was tough on behalf of the 855 women who served under her. That is a different kind of strength. That is strength that has direction. Strength aimed outward. When conditions in Birmingham were inadequate, she fought to improve them. When her women were disrespected, she addressed it. When that general came with his threat, she was sending a message to every woman in that battalion that she would not allow them to be diminished, that their service and their dignity were worth defending. That is what great leaders do. They don't just perform the mission. They ask constantly, what do my people need? What are they carrying? Am I protecting them not only from the external threats, but from the things inside the organization that would wear them down? I think about how rarely that question gets asked in the first responder and military culture. The focus is almost always outward. The mission, the threat, the objective. And the people doing the mission, their internal world, their well-being, their capacity to keep going, that gets treated like a personal responsibility and not a leadership responsibility. Charity Adams did not accept that division. She understood that her people's morale, their sense of dignity, their belief that their work mattered, all of that was part of her mission, and she led accordingly. Here is the flip side I want you to sit with. Because there are also people listening to this who are not in leadership roles, but who are being led poorly. Who are in organizations or on teams or in family systems where the people above them are not protecting them and where the culture is eating them alive. Charity Adams' life speaks to that too, because when the institution around her was failing, she did not wait for the institution to get it right before she took care of herself and her people. She worked within the system where she could and around it where she had to. She created a culture within her battalion that was protective and dignified and excellent regardless of what the larger structure was doing. You can do that too. Whatever your role, you have a circle of influence. You can be the person in your crew, your team, your family, your unit who decides that within your reach, people are going to be seen and protected and cared for. That choice ripples further than you know. This fourth lesson is one that is most personal to me. And I think it's going to land close to home for a lot of people in this community. The lesson is this: grief and pride can live in the same house. After the war ended, Charity Adams came home. She married, she had children, she earned her master's degree. She built a life that by any measure was full and meaningful. And the Army, the institution she had served with distinction, the institution she had given years of her life to, the institution she had represented as its highest ranking black female officer, essentially erased what she and the 6888 had done. For decades, these women received almost no formal recognition. Their service was largely written out of the official historical record. Contributions to the 6888 were not widely taught, not widely celebrated, not widely included in the story the military told about itself and the war. Charity Adams spent years, along with other advocates and historians, working to make sure the truth was told. She wrote her memoir, One Woman's Army, in 1989, decades after the events it described. She made sure her story and the story of those women was documented even before the world was prepared to honor it properly. The Congressional Gold Medal was finally awarded to the 6888 in 2022. Charity Adams passed away in 2002. She did not live to see that recognition arrive in full. I want you to feel the weight of that. To have done something genuinely remarkable, to have led with courage and excellency and integrity, to have served faithfully, and then to watch the institution you gave yourself to either ignore or minimize what you and your people accomplished. To live with the gap between what you know you did and what the world is willing to acknowledge. That grief is real. And it is a grief that many veterans and first responders know in some form. Maybe it's not about a congressional medal. Maybe it's about a career that ended before you were ready. And no one marked the transition with the weight it deserved. Maybe it's about an injury that took something from you that you will never fully get back. And the institution that sent you toward the risk was not there when the bill came due. Maybe it is about calls you still carry. Maybe it's about things you still see when you close your eyes. And the world has moved on as if none of it happened and you are just supposed to move on too. That grief is valid, all of it. You do not have to minimize it. You are not required to perform gratitude at the expense of your own pain. And you are also allowed to be proud. Those two things do not cancel each other out. What I find so powerful about Charity Adams in this part of her story is that she did not let the absence of external recognition erase her internal knowledge of what she and her team had done. She still knew. Her women still knew. She wrote it down. She spoke about it. She held the truth of it even when the institution would not. That is a profound act of resilience. Maintaining the truth of your own experience when the systems around you are not reflecting it back to you. For the people in our community who are carrying both right now, who are proud of what they gave and simultaneously grieving what it cost, you do not have to choose. Both things are true. The service mattered, the cost was real, and you can honor both. And if you are sitting in that tension right now and you do not quite know what to do with it, please reach out. That is exactly the kind of conversation I want to have. Email me at questionsforkara@gmail.com. We can unpack it together. The fifth and final lesson is the simplest and the most important. And here it is. Your story is not finished. After the war, Charity Adams did not stop. She came home to a country that was still deeply segregated, still openly hostile to black women in positions of power and authority, still not fully prepared to receive everything she had to offer. And she built her life anyway. She got her master's degree. She served on civic boards. She raised her children. She wrote her book. She advocated for her fellow veterans. She lived with purpose and intention and presence well into her 80s. The chapter of her life that history remembers most was not her last chapter. And the chapter you are in right now is not your last chapter either. I say this a lot, but I want to say it again today because I think it bears repeating in this community specifically. I talk to so many veterans and first responders and their families who are somewhere in the middle of a hard season, a transition that is not going smoothly, a recovery that is taking longer than expected, a period of rebuilding after something broke, a career, a relationship, a sense of self. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, a voice starts to whisper that maybe the best is behind them. The person they used to be before the injury, before the transition, before the thing that changed everything, maybe that was the best version they were ever going to get. I want to challenge that voice right here, right now. Not with false optimism, not with a kind of cheerful dismissal that does not actually help anyone, but with Charity Adams. This woman finished a war, came home to a country that ignored what she had done, was denied recognition that she more than earned, and still chose to build, still chose to contribute, still chose to write it down and speak it aloud, and make sure that the truth outlasted the silence. She was not a one chapter person, and neither are you. Resilience is not a single moment. It is not one impressive act of courage under pressure. It is the accumulation of small decisions made day after day to keep building, to keep showing up, to keep insisting that the story you are living has more pages left. What is the next chapter you want to write? I'm not asking that rhetorically. I genuinely want you to think about that. Not the chapter you think you are supposed to want. Not the chapter that looks right from the outside. But the chapter you actually want. The thing that when you imagine it, something in you gets a little bit lighter. That is where we go next. And if you want to think through what that might look for you, your family, the season you are in, you know how to find me. questionsforkara@gmail.com. I am here for that conversation. Charity Adams, Lieutenant Colonel, Pioneer. The first, the highest ranking. The one who cleared the backlog in half the expected time and then went home and kept building anyway. She walked into rooms the world told her she did not belong in and simply refused to leave. She led with excellence rooted in character rather than in performance. She protected her people with the same energy she used to protect her mission. She held her grief and her pride in both hands at the same time and kept moving. And she never once decided that her most important chapter was behind her. The 5 lessons she leaves us with are these: know your value before anyone assigns it to you. Choose excellence as an expression of your character, not as a performance for approval. Protect your people because resilience and leadership is never just for yourself. Let grief and pride exist together without forcing yourself to choose. And remember, always, that your story is not finished. I am so glad you were here for this one. Before I go, I want to take a moment to thank the sponsors who make this show possible and who are genuinely part of this community and its mission. Thank you, DeemedFit. If you are working on your physical wellness and you want support from a company who actually understands the veteran and first responder experience, DeemedFit is built for you. Flawless Him or Her, an Amazon affiliate site where every purchase you make helps raise money that goes back into the support of veterans and first responders in their healing process. And thank you to Dubby Energy, clean, focused energy for the people who cannot afford to run at half capacity, whether that is a long shift or an early morning or a hard workout. Dubby Energy has you covered. You can find out more about these incredible sponsors and get access to discounts on their products by visiting our website at renewedperspectives.me. That is renewedperspectives.me. I will have all the websites and my email linked in the show notes so it's easy for you to find. And if anything in today's episode stirred something in you, if you have a question or a topic you want me to dig into, something from your own experience that you want to unpack or share, or just something you need to say to someone who's going to understand, my inbox is open. Email me at questionsforkara@gmail.com. I read every single message, and I mean that. Charity Adams did not wait for the world to be ready for her. She showed up anyway. She did the work. She made sure her truth outlasted the silence. And so can you. I'll see you in the next episode. And until then, take care of yourselves out there. Take care of each other. And remember, you were trained to be superhuman. Here you can just be human.